Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a tiny house? We did, and today we'd like to share our experiment in simple living with you.
It started a few years ago when a good friend of ours started building a tiny home. We thought, who in their right mind would actually want to build a tiny home? And then we said, well, what would it actually be like to live in a tiny home?
It turns out it's an idea that's been gaining mass appeal over the last several years. Well, mass appeal according to Facebook and the blog world at least. In early 2012, we were looking at real estate trying to figure out our next move. When we laid all of our options out, building and living in a tiny house actually came out on top.
Building a house is something we've talked about over the last several years, and we thought we'd buy a home or a duplex first and then eventually buy a piece of property and build a house, but we didn't think it would come so soon. So we decided to embark on an experiment in simple living by building and living in an off-grid tiny home powered by the sun.
We live in a society where the mentality is that more is better. We're led to believe that more stuff, more shoes, more clothes, more house, more car will make us happy. We were disenchanted with the notion that more would make us happy. We wanted to know if, in fact, living with less would make us happier. But when we started telling some people, some friends and family about our plans to build a tiny house, they all thought we were crazy. Despite their helpful and some really not so helpful advice, we decided to build our tiny house anyway.
I started researching the legal specifications on a house built on a trailer. What was the maximum width, length, and height that it could be without requiring a wide load permit? And then we started researching what other people have done. We started planning our tiny home in the living room of our 1,200 square foot condo with a roll of masking tape, a pad of paper, and a tape measure. We literally measured out the dimensions of our house within our living room. This is about how wide our house is right now. It was a little scary at first. Could we actually live in a space this big, this small, smaller than the living room and dining room where we were standing? Smaller than this stage?
So we made a list of everything we thought we needed to be happy and comfortable. And then we started crossing some things off that list. Do we really need 2 desks? A full couch? Space to accommodate overnight guests? Should we build a ladder or stairs to get up to the loft? So we used the 80-20 rule. We took the 20% of our house that we used 80% of the time, and we designed our house to include just that. We cut out much of the other stuff that's not used very often in a regular house. We didn't just take a regular house and shrink it down to make it tiny either. We cut out everything we possibly could that wasn't used daily or at least a couple times a week. Take a moment and think about the 20% of your home that's used 80% of the time. Are there certain rooms or furniture or objects that get used often and others barely get used? We realized that the key to living happily in a very small space would be to design the space to effectively use every square foot. We designed the space to incorporate our lifestyle, our stuff, and our needs. We designed it and built it for us. So we shifted and rearranged and reprioritized our need for stuff and for space. After at least 10 revisions, we finally agreed on a floor plan that would suit our needs and wants.
Once we had a decent set of floor plans in place, we started rearranging and looking at different areas of what we could change, but this is really kind of what we liked. We started building our tiny home here, and we actually had the opportunity to work with a community workshop that had space to build our tiny home and gave us access to tools as well. We decided to build on a trailer, which allowed us to keep a little bit more flexible on where we live. I enlisted some friends to help out, and it was enjoyable to share their experience with others, and it also made construction go a little bit faster. Here we are 5 months later, officially moved in. Solar and the battery power backup system was working full-time and meeting our everyday needs. It was great to step back and look at what we've done over the last 5 months, knowing that we personally designed and built everything from start to scratch, start to finish, excluding a little bit of the insulation. Here, large windows light up the kitchen and dining area. Aspen woodwork has a really unique graining to it, and the lighter color, and it was a native to Colorado, so it's one of the reasons why we chose the aspen. Every cabinet and door was specifically designed and built for our needs.
For example, I cook a lot. And so we store all our nuts, seeds, beans, grains, and dried fruit in mason jars. So we designed a drawer specifically for that purpose. It's actually our favorite drawer in the house. We also made use of the toe kick at the very bottom of the cabinet, which is wasted space in most kitchens. We use those drawers to store things like baking sheets and muffin tins.
We had a compromise when it came to the couch, so we decided to build a window seat with large windows on all three sides, and the couch actually doubles as a guest bed and folds out and tucks under the table.
Most tiny homes out there have a ladder to get up to the loft. We were not too excited about climbing into and out of bed using a ladder each day. So we actually built stairs to get up into bed that also double as a dresser.
I wasn't too excited about setting up a laptop on a kitchen table, so we designed and built a desk that would suit our needs. As two young working professionals, we spend quite a bit of our time at home at the desks, so this was important to us. We always get a lot of questions about our bathroom. Despite our house and bathroom being tiny, we still have a full stand-up shower, a little hand sink, and a composting toilet.
And despite what you may be thinking about the composting toilet, it's actually relatively low maintenance and doesn't smell at all, which made me very happy. So almost 2 years after moving into our tiny house, our 181 square foot tiny house, we're living there full time and we're somehow still happily married. So you may be wondering, what is it actually like to live in a tiny house? Well, let's share some things with you. First, there's an element of flexibility. When your house is on a trailer, it's not attached to the ground. It may seem obvious, but there's a certain reluctance of our generation to settle down, ourselves included. When your house is on a trailer, it allows you to move to different areas of town or the country to figure out where you really want to live. Moving is not contingent on the sale of your home or the end of your lease. You just need a truck big enough to pull your house with all of your stuff in it.
The smallness, stillness, and peacefulness of living in a tiny home has allowed us to think bigger. In our society, we tend to create our own private retreats at home, where there's little need to interact with community or even get to know your neighbors. Living in a tiny home also comes with some unexpected perks, like interconnectedness.
Living in a tiny house forces consciousness and conservation too. When your house is tiny, it forces you to think beyond your four walls and really pay attention. For example, if we drain our batteries, one of us, well, probably Dondi, is going to have to go out in the cold and start the generator or plug the house into AC power. It teaches you that resources are finite and things run out. Have you ever noticed when you pour cooking oil, if you use a large bottle, you tend to pour more than you would if you were pouring from a small bottle or one that's almost empty? Living in a tiny house with a water tank is very similar.
Did you know the average American uses 120 gallons of water each day? For two people, that's 240 gallons of water per two people. We have a 300-gallon water tank, and that lasts us for 1 full month, or about 5 gallons per person per day. When your water comes out of a tank, you tend to learn how to conserve a little differently. Showers get a little bit shorter.
Living in a tiny space forces you to think beyond your four walls. I mean, your house is tiny. So in a regular house, when you flush the toilet, water comes from somewhere and your poo goes floating away with it. In our tiny house, we use a composting toilet. The wood shavings came from rough sawn, untreated wood from the mill up the road, and, well, the rest, it's in there decomposing to be used later to fertilize trees or composted back into the earth.
The smallness, stillness, and peacefulness of our tiny home has really allowed us to think a little bit bigger. A little bit of repeat here, but in our society, we create our own world, our own private retreats at home where we tend to, have little interaction with the community. Living in our tiny home, we've created a lot of opportunity to reach out into the community and interact with other spaces and community services.
For example, the concept of home gym doesn't work very well when your space is 181 square feet. So you go to the gym, you work out, you make use of their space, interact with members of the community, and then you get to use their shower. When we decided that we really wanted to have 2 desks, we unfortunately had to cross that stackable washer and dryer off our floor plan. Instead, I go to the laundromat and do 2 to 3 loads of laundry in under an hour and a half. It's really not so bad. If you need to get away to work or study or read, you go to the library. They loan books, you take them back. You don't even have to store them in your house. That's pretty cool. Don't have a food processor or tool? Ask a friend or neighbor. Treat it kindly and return it with some freshly baked bread or chocolate chip cookies.
The limited space of living in a tiny home also changes your mindset around consumption. And in today's world, there's ads and media telling you to buy, and it's quite easy to fall into that trap. But when you live in a tiny home, space is at a premium.
Organization is essential, and everything has its place. When we moved into our tiny home, we quickly learned to ask a few key questions before we buy anything. First, do we really need this thing? If I buy this thing, where is it going to go? If there isn't space for it, we either need to get rid of something to make room, or donate, recycle, or find space within our house. Forces consciousness about buying behaviors as well, and the accumulation of stuff. Cramming too much stuff into a small space makes the space feel cluttered, cramped, and certainly less functional. Living in a small space forces you to pay attention to what you're buying, and this saves precious environmental resources and money.
When we were deciding whether to build our tiny home, we started comparing the cost of building versus renting. We calculated a 3-year payback based on the cost of building a tiny home that we would actually be excited to live in versus renting plus the utilities. The payback could have been even shorter, but one of my personal goals has always been to live off the grid. In building a tiny home, we were able to install solar panels and a battery storage system. With a house paid for, no mortgage payments, and limited utility expenses, we've been able to save for future expenses, like the baby on the way, and also save for additional adventures in the near future. After all, these are some of the reasons why we chose to build a tiny home. We wanted to know if, in fact, living simply would make us happier.
Living in a tiny home has allowed us to downsize our stuff, rearrange our priorities, and focus on living differently. In the past 2 years, we've traveled and really explored the world. Home is where your stuff is, and the rest of the world is your playground. Instead of spending much of our free time on home repairs, lawn maintenance, and cleaning our house like we've done in the past, because that only takes about maybe 10 minutes per week now, we've really focused our time and energy on living bigger. For example, in the past 2 years, I attended the 2012 Olympic Games in London, published a book, worked with clients to improve their health through my nutrition practice, and finished my master's degree in human nutrition.
I worked full-time as a civil engineer, contributed to local sustainability initiatives, studied hard, and recently took my professional engineering exam, which I just recently found out, too, that I passed.
Yay. Hurry.
Over the last few years, we've traveled to over 10 national parks, including Yellowstone, and we cycled the Durango 100 in southwest Colorado, and skied and snowboarded over a month in the Colorado Rockies. We just got back from a recent 2-week trip to Grand Canyon, Hoover Dam, Zion, and 4 other national parks. We also got to visit the slot canyons in southern Utah. Traveling and exploring is something we love to do. It allows us to see different parts of the world and the country, and allows us to immerse ourselves in other people's cultures and learn from our experiences.
Living in a tiny house, we've developed habits that will focus on less consumption, less emphasis on stuff, more emphasis on community, and engaging in fulfilling life experiences. Life is a compilation of experiences, not just stuff. Making the conscious decision to do things differently is hard, but it is incredibly fulfilling. Dare to be different.